My mother had me institutionalized at 16 for being too difficult. 12 years later, she paid me to rewrite her brand without realizing I was her daughter. They said I was too difficult to deal with. So they sent me away, not because I broke the law, not because I hurt anyone, but because I made them uncomfortable. I was 16 when my family decided they didn't want to deal with me anymore. I wasn't wild, I didn't sneak out, I didn't party, I didn't drink. I just didn't pretend to be okay with things I knew were wrong. And in a house where silence was considered obedience, that made me a problem. At school, I was the girl who corrected teachers when they were wrong, who stood up when someone was being humiliated, who pushed back when told to watch her tone. I had a voice, I used it, and they hated me for it. At home, I was worse, at least in their eyes. My mom said I was too intense. My stepfather said I was always looking for a fight. And my sister Amanda was everything I wasn't: composed, agreeable, always smiling at the right people in the right way. When she spoke up, it was called leadership. When I did it, it was attitude. Amanda played violin, volunteered at animal shelters, and cried gracefully at family funerals. I wore boots in the summer and read banned books. I called out Greg, my stepfather, when he made passive-aggressive comments about girls these days. I reminded my mom once that she didn't cry when I broke my arm falling off a bike, but sobbed for 3 days when Amanda didn't get into her top college. I think that was the beginning of the end. The problem was never that I was too difficult. The problem was that I saw too much. And I said it out loud. Amanda once took my private journal and read it aloud at a sleepover. Pages filled with things I'd never said about feeling invisible, about wishing anyone would ask if I was okay. She laughed while reading it. They all did. When I found out, I screamed. I broke the framed family photo in the hallway. I told Amanda I hated her. And in the silence that followed, I looked my mother dead in the eye and asked her, "Why do you always pick her?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. 2 days later, they came for me. It was 5:07 in the morning when the knock came. I thought it was a dream until I opened my eyes and saw a tall man in a navy windbreaker standing at the foot of my bed, holding a clipboard. Behind him, my mom stood with her arms crossed, her face a frozen mask of something between guilt and finality. "Sloan," she said flatly, "you're going to a place that can help you." She never said "I love you." She never said "I'm sorry." She didn't even say goodbye. I was told I had 10 minutes to pack. No electronics, just a bag with the basics. Amanda didn't even come downstairs. Greg wasn't home. I remember standing on the porch with my duffel bag, watching the sunrise bleed into the winter sky, and realizing something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. No one was coming to save me. They weren't worried about me. They were relieved. Relieved that the shouting would stop, that they could go back to pretending everything was fine, that I was someone else's problem now. The drive to the airport was silent. The escort said his name was Mike. I didn't respond. I stared out the window and tried not to cry. I refused to give them that. Not then. Not ever again. They flew me across the country to a therapeutic boarding school nestled in the mountains of Utah. It was the kind of place that looked peaceful in brochures, serene, clean, full of smiling girls and words like healing and growth. But when I got there, it felt more like a prison, dressed in beige. There were no locks on the doors, but there didn't need to be. You were watched 24/7. Your letters were read before they were sent. If you cried too much, they said you were manipulative. If you didn't cry at all, you were labeled sociopathic. Everything was twisted, filtered, reinterpreted. I learned quickly the best way to survive was to say what they wanted to hear. To nod, smile, admit you were broken, promise to change. But inside, I stayed sharp. I listened, I observed. I wrote in my head even when they took my notebooks away. They thought they were breaking me down, but they were just teaching me how to play the game better than anyone else. And still, on the nights when everything was too quiet, when I could hear my own breath echo in that whitewashed room, I'd ask myself, what happens to a girl when even her own mother thinks she's a burden? Does she disappear? Does she become what they said she was? Or does she survive in silence until the world is forced to listen? The first thing they did was take my name. At the intake desk, the woman didn't even look at me as she clipped a wristband around my arm. "Your unit B number 17, she said, flatly scribbling on a clipboard. No one called me Sloan again for weeks. The school didn't look like a school. It looked like a rehab center dressed up as a meditation retreat. beige walls, laminate floors. Too many inspirational posters trying to convince us we weren't trapped. Progress, not perfection. Healing happens here, all lies. We weren't students, we were subjects, monitored, managed, controlled. Everything was regulated down to the minute. Wake up at 6 a.m. sharp, 5 minutes to shower, 8 to eat. Chores rotated, but punishments didn't need a reason. Too many questions, defiance, too quiet withdrawal. There were no closed doors, not when you changed, not in bathrooms. All mail was read, some never sent. Phone calls were rare, always scripted, always supervised. If you cried in therapy, you were manipulating. If you didn't, you were emotionally disconnected. There was no way to win. Girls came and went. Some stayed 6 months, some more than a year. Some came for anxiety, others for trauma. Some, like me, just refused to be quiet, obedient, or small. For the first few weeks, I did what most of us did. I shut down, said what they wanted to hear, made eye contact when asked, learned to own my mistakes, learned to apologize for things I hadn't done. But I never let go of myself. I didn't just survive there. I studied, watched, learned. I started noticing patterns, which staff cracked when pushed, which therapists had favorites, what phrases made you progressing, what made you resistant. And I realized if they wanted me broken, they'd never get to see me whole. So I gave them just enough. Enough to think I was playing along, but inside I was building something. I became obsessed with understanding people, why they acted the way they did, how control was enforced, how stories were shaped and sold as truth. I read everything I could find. Psychology books, behavior guides, old therapy manuals left behind by staff long gone. That's when I met her, Ms. Rayner. She wasn't like the rest. No fake smile, no syrupy voice dripping with policy empathy. She was sharp, honest, blunt. She taught emotional accountability twice a week. Most girls dreaded it. I listened, not because I liked her, but because she didn't treat me like I was broken. One day after class, she pulled me aside. "You don't belong here," she said. I froze, trying to read her face. Was it pity, contempt? But she added, "You're not crazy, and you're not cruel. You're just not quiet, and that scares people." I didn't answer, but something in me cracked open. Just a little. She started slipping me real books. Jung, Skinner, Brené Brown. No instructions, just a look and a quiet. "You'll know what to do with this." I read them all, twice. I started taking mental notes, not just on staff, on the girls too. What triggered them, what calmed them, how tone could shift a room. I wasn't studying to heal. I was studying to survive and to understand the system that decided who got labeled too difficult in the first place. Some girls adapted, some broke, some just disappeared overnight, never spoken of again. But I stayed. For 14 months. 14 months of walking on eggshells, of being told my memories weren't real, my feelings weren't valid, my voice was dangerous. 14 months of watching the most vulnerable girls slowly bend into shapes they didn't choose until they stopped resisting. Not because they got better, but because they gave up. I didn't give up, I got smarter. I learned how to say enough to pass evaluations, how to shift my posture, my voice, my gaze, just enough to look stable. I built a persona, harmless, introspective, compliant. They called it growth. Told my mother I was finally getting better. What they didn't know was that I was documenting everything, every manipulation, every rule weaponized with kindness, every phrase meant to make you doubt your own mind. And the irony, when I finally graduated, they handed me a laminated certificate. Outstanding emotional growth, smiles, handshakes, a speech about how far I'd come. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. But I did neither. I smiled, said thank you, walked out the doors they never thought I'd leave through. And I made a promise to myself that day. One day, they'd pay to hear what I had to say. Because I wasn't just a girl who survived being institutionalized. I was someone who learned the rules of the system, so I could outplay every single one of them. I turned 18 on a Tuesday. The staff gave me a cupcake with a single candle and a laminated card that said, "You're ready." That afternoon, I packed the same duffel I had arrived with, same clothes, same toothbrush. Nothing else. No souvenirs. No see you soon. No one came to pick me up. When I asked where I was supposed to go, they handed me a printed list of local shelters and halfway homes. That was it. 14 months of healing, and they sent me out with a cupcake and a photocopy. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Amanda. I didn't call anyone. I took a bus 2 towns over and rented a room the size of a closet with what little stipend the state provided. It had one window, a mattress on the floor, and walls so thin I could hear the man next door snoring through the night. I bought a space heater with my first paycheck and used milk crates as furniture. I wasn't scared. I wasn't angry. I was free. For the first time in years, no one was watching me. No one was waiting for me to slip up. No one was calling me aggressive or a problem. I got a job washing dishes at a cafe. Late shifts, under the table. No questions asked. I saved every cent. Skipped lunch, lived off instant noodles and tap water. No one knew my name. I liked it that way. At night, I sat on my mattress with an old government-issued laptop and started researching. Not just survival tips, but everything I could get my hands on: human psychology, brand messaging, behavior patterns, micro-expressions, influence tactics. And slowly, it all started to connect. The way that counselor used repetition to wear us down. The way the staff redirected blame to maintain control. The way smiles were used as weapons. I saw it everywhere in politics and advertising, in media. And I realized something: people don't respond to facts. They respond to feeling. They follow the story that makes them feel safest, even if it's a lie. And if I could understand that story, I could rewrite it. I started an online certification in consumer psychology through a scholarship for at-risk youth. They called me a statistic. I called it leverage. Every night I took notes, practiced frameworks, built a portfolio from scratch: mock brands for candles, skincare, streetwear. I gave them logos, slogans, tone of voice guidelines, all built on psychological triggers I knew far too well. A few months later, I landed my first freelance gig. Some startup founder posted in a forum looking for branding help. I sent a mock strategy, pointed out his inconsistent tone, his weak audience, targeting the emotional gaps. He thought I had a marketing degree. I didn't correct him. That first job paid $300. When the money hit my account, I cried. Not from joy, but from something deeper. Like I was finally stepping into the version of myself they tried to bury. I reinvested every cent, bought a better laptop, enrolled in more courses, learned how to invoice, how to pitch, how to hide the fact that I was 19, had no degree, and lived in a shoebox. No one knew my history, no one asked. And I made sure to keep it that way. I worked nights, studied early mornings, built a small client base: wellness coaches, indie fashion brands, nonprofits, trying to look more polished. I became the ghost behind their growth. I stopped checking my family's social media. At some point, Amanda graduated with honors. My mom remarried again. Greg was gone. None of them knew where I was. None of them asked. And I didn't give them a reason to. Because I wasn't coming back for closure. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was building something they'd never see coming. People romanticize rebirth like it's a moment of radiant transformation, like you shed your pain and become someone dazzling. That's not true. Rebirth is slow, ugly. It's scraping dishes until your fingers bleed, studying psychology while your neighbor yells through the wall, pretending to be older, smarter, calmer than you really are. Rebirth is survival with a strategy. By the time I turned 20, I had a registered LLC, 3 retainer clients, and glowing testimonials from people who thought I was a mid-level agency director. They had no idea who I really was, and neither did my family, because I didn't just walk away from that facility. I erased myself. And then I started over, from scratch, on my own terms. Success didn't arrive like fireworks. It came quietly in slow, deliberate waves. A client referral, then another, then a warm introduction to a founder prepping for a funding round. That led to a contract with an e-commerce brand, then a wellness tech platform. I wasn't chasing them. They came to me. The better I became at shaping other people's stories, the more powerful mine became, because no one knew it. No one questioned my background. They were too busy trying to get on my calendar. I didn't go by my full name anymore. I became Sloan K. Short, clean, untraceable. The K didn't stand for anything, but it looked sharp in a signature. Memorable, yet generic enough to keep people from digging. And under that name, I became known. Not famous, but recognized. In the kind of quiet that matters. Founders whispering, "You should reach out to her." Teams saying our messaging finally clicks because of her. Agencies offering to white label me behind the scenes. I still worked remotely, camera off, no interviews, no photos, but the work. It spoke louder than any promo ever could. And when the workload grew, I didn't panic. I scaled. I built a small distributed team: copywriters, brand analysts, behavior experts. People like me, no hand-holding, no fluff. Some were neurodivergent. Some hadn't finished college. Some had resume gaps they didn't want to explain. I never asked. I gave them the kind of trust I had always needed. And in return, they gave me brilliance. Together, we became a micro agency. We didn't advertise, didn't cold pitch. We chose who we worked with. And slowly, K&Co became a name passed around like a secret weapon. What we offered wasn't just brand strategy, it was emotional clarity. I taught my team what I had learned the hard way: consumers aren't logical. They buy from places that make them feel seen, safe, validated. If you truly understand what someone is afraid to admit out loud, you can sell almost anything. We didn't manipulate. We revealed. We used storytelling the same way I once learned to survive: calm, calculated, always 3 steps ahead. And the irony never left me. I used to be the girl everyone wanted to fix. Now I was the one they called when their multi-million-dollar narrative broke. By 23, our clients included 2 venture-backed startups, 3 DTC brands, and 1 national nonprofit in the middle of a rebrand. I sat on Zoom calls with CEOs twice my age, who treated my insight like gospel. They didn't know I was once labeled a behavioral liability. They just knew I made their message finally work. It wasn't about ego. It wasn't even about validation. It was about precision. I could shape how the world saw an entire company. All from a quiet desk under a name that didn't even exist 5 years ago. And still, no one knew who I really was. No one knew that the girl behind Sloan K had once been locked in a facility, stripped of her voice, reduced to a number, trained to say the right words just to earn a supervised call. Now I was the one telling billion-dollar brands what those right words should be. And they listened. One night, a client came to us in crisis. Their brand had been called out for performative activism, tone-deaf language, the usual PR disaster. I recognized the agency behind their last campaign. It was Amanda's. She had started a boutique firm after branding herself as a women's leadership speaker. Her face was all over their website. Her bio read like a redemption arc. I didn't flinch, didn't mention it, didn't reach out, but I took the job. 6 weeks later, the client relaunched under our new positioning. The feedback was overwhelming. Their engagement tripled. Their messaging landed. They even credited us on a podcast. Name Drop Me Sloan K helped us find our voice again. Amanda reposted it. She had no idea. I didn't screenshot it, didn't save it, didn't even smirk. Because this wasn't about her anymore. This was about me. I didn't need revenge, I needed results. But revenge came anyway. I used to imagine what it would feel like to be in the same room with them again. Would I freeze? Would I crumble? Would I finally scream everything I never got to say? But when it happened, it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like business. It started with an email from a consulting agency I occasionally partnered with. One of their clients, a legacy family business, was undergoing a messy rebrand. Outdated messaging, internal power struggles, declining market share. They needed someone who could handle high-stakes strategy while navigating delicate family dynamics. My contact said, "They've tried a few people, but no one's cracked it." Thought of you immediately. I skimmed the brand name. It was familiar, but vague. I accepted the intro. The first meeting was in a boutique conference space downtown. I arrived early, neutral blazer, hair pulled back, no makeup. Polished enough to be competent, forgettable enough to stay invisible. When the door opened and Amanda walked in, my heart didn't skip, it stopped. She looked exactly the same. Perfect blowout. Polished navy dress. Eyes that scanned the room like she already owned it. Behind her, my mother. Gray roots, designer bag. That same cold jawline. They didn't recognize me, not even a flicker. Amanda extended her hand with performative warmth. "Thanks for meeting with us, Ms. K. Not Sloan. Not even close." I shook her hand and sat down like my world hadn't just shifted off its axis. "We've been struggling with clarity," Amanda said. "Our messaging is inconsistent. We need someone who can help us articulate who we are internally and externally. My mother nodded beside her lips drawn tight. And we need it fast. We're bleeding engagement. I smiled. Tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. I specialize in helping clients speak clearly about who they are, especially when they've spent years avoiding it. Neither of them reacted. I wasn't surprised. Back then, they never truly saw me, not even when we were in the same room. Not even when they signed the papers to have me institutionalized. Amanda pulled out a leather folder filled with reports charts, failed campaigns. I took my time reading. Their language was empty, their values vague, their mission copied from a bank's diversity page. They didn't need better copy, they needed to be told the truth. I delivered it straight, surgical, emotionless. This reads like a brand that doesn't trust itself, I said. You're using the right words, just in the wrong order, and it shows. Amanda blinked. My mother looked faintly offended, but neither of them pushed back. Because I sounded like I knew what I was doing. Because I did. We signed a short-term contract 1 month. My job was to redirect the narrative and rebuild internal coherence. I worked remotely, sent weekly reports, rewrote their entire brand book. I didn't flinch when Amanda emailed to compliment my insight. I didn't crack when my mother responded brilliant summary to my strategy deck. And when I was invited to present the new positioning to the board, I said yes. I stood in front of a room full of people my family respected, lawyers, advisors, their CFO, Amanda, my mother, and I walked them through the new brand message they'd be using moving forward. Every word crafted by the girl they erased. Every phrase shaped by someone they once declared too broken to speak. They applauded, literally applauded. My mother leaned over to Amanda and whispered, "She's good." Amanda nodded. "She's exactly what we needed." That was the moment, not the meeting, not the contract. That whisper, that compliment passed to a stranger without realizing it was the child they once abandoned. I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. I felt finished. Like something inside me had quietly closed. I didn't correct them. I didn't say my name. I just smiled, packed my things. At the end of the meeting, Amanda walked me to the elevator. "We'll probably need more of your time in Q3, she said. I nodded. "Let me know. I have a wait list, but I'll make space." She grinned. "You're hard to find, you know that I Googled you and barely found anything." "It's kind of mysterious." I met her eyes. "That's by design." The elevator opened. I stepped in, and I left. They didn't recognize me, but they remembered me in the only way that mattered, as the woman who rebuilt the thing they couldn't fix themselves. They kept coming back. What started as a 1-month project turned into 3, then 6. First it was messaging, then campaign strategy, then executive coaching on brand-consistent communication. Amanda said I had a gift. My mother called me indispensable. They had no idea. At that point, I was running half their public image through strategy docs, brand guidelines, investor decks. I wasn't just a consultant, I was their voice. And still, they never asked who I was. Not once. There was a moment 4 months in when Amanda forwarded me a family photo they wanted to use in a heritage campaign. One of those legacy shots from their early days. I was in it, 15 years old, off to the side, half-turned, unsmiling. I don't think she even noticed. I deleted it from the draft. She never brought it up. At first, I thought it was arrogance, that they were too self-absorbed to connect the dots. But then I realized it wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. Certainty that I had disappeared. That I couldn't possibly be someone they needed now. That the difficult girl they discarded could never become the woman solving their problems. They were blind to the possibility because they'd already written me out of their story. So I let them keep that version, because it gave me leverage. Amanda began CCing me on every high-level thread. I sat in on vendor interviews, PR briefings, investment meetings. My mother asked me to ghostwrite a keynote speech for a women's business summit. The theme, resilience. I wrote the whole thing. Opening line. Sometimes the people we misunderstand the most turn out to be the ones who save us. She read it on stage, got a standing ovation. I watched from the back of the room, perfectly still. She had no idea she was quoting her daughter. And still I said nothing, not because I was afraid, but because I no longer needed to be seen by them. I had outgrown that need. All I wanted now was for the truth to hang invisible between us. Power without recognition, influence without exposure. There's something razor-sharp about being essential to people who once called you unnecessary. Something surgical. They didn't just need my work, they depended on it. I became the name they dropped when trying to close deals. Our consultant Sloan K is behind the new direction. They added me to contracts, pulled me into long-term planning. My mother introduced me to an investor by saying, "She's brilliant. We trust her judgment more than anyone." I almost laughed. Because they did trust me. They just didn't understand why it came so naturally. They didn't know I had studied their behavior long before I ever learned to name it. I had watched Amanda wrap condescension in charm, watched my mother lie with a smile when she was afraid. I knew their tells. I had memorized every pattern of avoidance, every deflection, every defense mechanism. And now I use that knowledge to guide every meeting shape, every pitch, and steer every conversation. I knew when to let Amanda feel like she was leading. I knew how to word things so my mother would think it was her idea. I didn't manipulate them to hurt them. I protected them from themselves. And every time they thanked me, praised me, told me I was the best thing that happened to their company, I felt nothing. No vindication, just clarity. Just confirmation that they still had no idea how much they owed to the girl they once discarded. One time, Amanda laughed and said, "You must have had the most stable childhood. You read people like a book." I smiled. I had to. It wasn't a lie. Eventually, they offered me equity. I declined. Not because I didn't want it, but because I wanted something more distance. Let them keep wondering who I was. Let them believe I was some mysterious genius who showed up just in time. Let them live with the gnawing sense that they could never quite own me. Because they couldn't. They already lost that chance. I never planned to tell them. That was the rule. Stay quiet, stay useful, stay gone. But the thing about lies, even the quiet ones, is that they eventually crack under their own weight. It happened during a quarterly review. The company was presenting its strongest numbers in years. Improved brand perception, steady growth, a new investor deal on the table. They gave me full credit. Amanda said it in front of the board without hesitation. None of this would have happened without Sloan K. I sat there listening, watching them celebrate a version of me that wasn't real. Or maybe it was. Maybe Sloan K had become real in a way the girl I used to be never could. Afterward, Amanda asked me to stay behind. "We're building something huge," she said, her hand resting on the edge of the table. "And I want you in deeper, full-time, high level. We're talking C-suite." My mother nodded beside her. "You've earned a seat at this table." I stared at them. Amanda, the sister who once read my journal out loud for fun. My mother, who sent me away with a signature and a sigh. And suddenly the room felt heavier than ever. It wasn't anger, not even sadness. It was disbelief. That they could sit across from me and still not see it, still not see me. So I asked a simple question. "Do you remember the girl you sent to that behavioral program in Utah?" Amanda looked confused. "What?" My mother frowned. "Why are you bringing that up?" I shrugged. "Just curious. Do you remember her name?" There was a pause. And then my mother's face changed. Not horror, not guilt, just calculation. Like a puzzle piece slipping into place and her wishing it hadn't. Amanda tilted her head. "Wait." I reached into my bag and pulled out a photo. Old, blurry, a scanned intake form. My name, my ID number. The date they handed me over to strangers. I placed it on the table. Silence. My mother's fingers tightened around her glass. Amanda's eyes darted between the paper and my face. Disbelief giving way to recognition. "That's not possible," she said, barely audible. You can't be," but she already knew. She heard it now, in my voice, saw it in my jaw. In the calm defiance they tried to break years ago. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I simply said, "I'm the girl you made disappear." Amanda's mouth opened, then closed. My mother looked down. At the table, at her hands, anywhere but me. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was weight, gravity. Amanda spoke first. "Why didn't you say anything?" I blinked slowly. "Would you have listened?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. My mother cleared her throat. "You could have come to us. We didn't know what happened to you." I cut her off. Not loud, not angry, just done. "You didn't ask." And that was it. Not a scream, not a breakdown, just 4 words. 4 words that hovered in the air like smoke. I gathered my things, my laptop, my notes, the photo. Neither of them moved. At the door, I paused. Everything I did for this company was real, I said. But I'm done working with people who couldn't recognize me when I was right in front of them. Amanda stood reaching out like it would fix something. Wait, Sloan, please. But it was too late for names now. They'd used mine up years ago. A few weeks after I walked out of that room, Amanda sent me an email. Just one line, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. What do you even say to that? Sorry you didn't recognize your own sister. Sorry you paraded around preaching about women's voices while erasing mine. Sorry you only saw my worth after I disappeared. No, some apologies come too late. And others, they were never really meant for you. They're for the sender's conscience, their image, their unfinished guilt. And I wasn't here to complete anyone's redemption arc. I had already written my own. After the reveal, I got offers. From people who'd been in the room. People who saw how still I sat. How precise I was, how I didn't unravel when I had every reason to. They called it poise. I called it practice. One venture fund offered me a retainer just to sit in on branding pitches and veto the ones that didn't know what they were talking about. I said no, I didn't need more power, I needed peace. I scaled down K&Co, kept only the clients who respected boundaries, the projects that didn't bleed me dry. I stopped ghostwriting for brands that profited from values they didn't live by. And for the first time since I was 16, I stopped performing survival. I moved to a new city, rented a small place filled with real quiet, bought my first couch not used, not borrowed, not something left behind by a roommate. I chose the color myself, rust red, like dried blood that somehow turned warm again. I stopped explaining where I came from, not because I was hiding, but because I didn't owe anyone a backstory. People crave clean arcs. A girl gets sent away. She fights her way back. She forgives. The family heals. Everyone hugs. But that's not this story. This story ends with me knowing exactly who I am without needing them to understand it. This story ends with silence, but not the hollow kind, the peaceful kind. Sometimes I pass old conference centers, the ones I used to present in, glass walls, lanyards, people smiling while talking about authenticity like it's a marketing asset, not a basic human right. I don't feel bitterness, I feel distance, the kind you don't measure in miles, only in becoming. And once in a while, I hear Amanda's name in passing, see my mother's face in a reposted clip. She's quoting from the speech I wrote. She's using slides my team designed. She's pitching ideas in a voice I gave them. They still don't know who I became, but they feel it every time they speak in the language I built. And that's enough, because the best revenge isn't watching them beg. It's watching them thrive off the brilliance of the person they once discarded without ever realizing it.